Okay, in this lesson we're going to go over a few miscellaneous topics covered in Chapter 7. The most important is compliance violations. But first I want to mention something I forgot in the last lesson regarding vendors' payees. I just wanted to point out that under General Maintenance, vendors' payees, if you look under Frequently Asked Questions, we do have a screencast tutorial for vendor payees. So we don't have that for all of the maintenance areas under the general module, but it's a very useful, and because it's a common thing that all of our customers are going to use vendor payees to make payments, we've included that screencast. So that'll be something. If you have any questions, you can launch that directly from within the software and watch a video recording, short video recording related to that. So you can please turn to page 111 in the chapter, in the New Client Handbook, Chapter 7. And as you can see there, the menu path is General Maintenance Entity Setup. Well, we went over Entity Setup, but we skipped a portion of it under the System tabs, and that was Compliance Controls. If we look quickly at the overview, it says, in this section we'll review in greater detail the compliance control options in the Entity Setup. Compliance control refers to the level in which the UN program forces users to adhere to Ohio law or to just good accounting practices when posting transactions. Now, for example, users should not spend more than the fund cash balance. So throughout the class I've been noting that in UN, where auditors have directed us to, we enforce certain compliance controls for good accounting practices and Ohio Revised Code when we can. Now, there's certain things that might violate Ohio's Revised Code that we can't stop you from doing. We don't have built-in controls because it might depend on the circumstance in which that law applies or that practice applies. But where we can build those in and prevent you from accidentally or inadvertently violating Ohio Revised Code or an essential accounting practice, we've done that. And so you'll see that throughout through software. We'll demonstrate one of them here. But there are settings that relate to this, and these three settings you can see on page 111. I'll flip to the software. And those settings are controlled under General Maintenance Entity Setup under the System page or tab, Compliance Controls. And we're going to demonstrate this with an exercise. This first setting, this radio button, says Stop User, we're not in compliance. That's the default setting. So I'm going to save that so we know it's on that setting, and I'll close the Entity Setup form. And then we're going to go back to our Buckeye Township story. And this is kind of diverts to that. Remember Buckeye Township in our little fantasy world, the Bucks won that championship game, and all went well. And we know it didn't really turn out in real life, but we can dream, can't we? And so that happened, and our fiscal officer is Brutus Buckeye, and he just went a little bit wild after the night of celebration. And the next day he came in feeling a little bit bad and was not himself. So he does something really crazy. Well, what does he do? He decides after that big win he's going to write himself a big fat check because he deserves a bonus, being Brutus Buckeye and all. So I'm being silly here, but it does illustrate a point. Exercise number 1. So we're going to select Brutus Buckeye and select the date of today's date, even though our demo would be something way back in January, or our story. And so I'm going to select quantity 1. And as you can see here, Brutus is not himself and not being really smart here. Not too smart of a crook. he's going to put in a check for himself of $1 million. It's a pretty good bonus. And let's face it, it doesn't really matter what account code we distribute it to because we don't have $1 million at our township. So we'll type it in anyways. So there's our $1 million. Notice it allows me to save that into batch. Remember, batch is temporary. Well, you know, maybe I typed in the wrong number. Maybe I added too many zeros. It should have been $10 and I typed in $1 million. Okay, I can fix it. It hasn't really posted. Nothing's posted to cache at this point. But Brutus says, I really do want to cut myself that check, so he clicks Post Print, print one selected item, puts the check in the printer, and he's ready to go to Hawaii. Oh, big error message, red light. He gets the red hand here, as we can see, and it gives him an explanation. Posting this item would cause the following compliance violations. And we can skip the next line there. I'll explain it in a moment. But so it's going to list all the violations here separated by these dotted lines. So it says insufficient fund balance in the fund that I selected. And then it gives you the Ohio Revised Code that it violates. The fund balance may not become negative. And then you can look up a report that's going to show you this is my cash balance. I can't write a check for $1 million. I don't have that much in Road and Bridge Fund. Then it gives you the insufficient unencumbered balance in the account. Well, your budget, you can't do this per your budget. It's not right. Look up the Ohio Revised Code if you want on the Auditor State's website and find out about that. Print your appropriation reports. And then maybe it doesn't violate in a direct way the Ohio Revised Code, at least we didn't have that in our system, but overspending your primary checking account is not a really good balance. Can't become negative. So we're going to keep you from doing that. Most of these compliance, I believe there's something like 24 built in the software. It's going to, maybe not that much, but close, a good 10 to 20 are built in the software. It's going to stop you before you violate that code. So obviously this is a silly extreme example. I mean, if you wanted to cut a check for yourself for $1 million, you wouldn't have to use the UAN system. You could just get the checkbook and write yourself a check for $1 million and see see what happens at the bank. And if that works, see what happens with the police. But obviously that's silly for us to do this. We wouldn't record that in UAN if that were the case. But in real life, it may just be a simple order of operations. For instance, you have in Fund A, you're trying to write a check for $5,000 for a payment for a bill that came in. Your current fund balance is only $2,000. Well, maybe you just got money in, a good grant or you got some money and a receipt that you deposited at the bank for $10,000. So in reality, you have $12,000 for this fund, and it's deposited, but you didn't record that receipt in UAN. So when you try to cut that check, if you look at your fund balance, it's only going to be $2,000. But in reality, all you need to do is record that receipt for $10,000, and you'll have sufficient amount of money in the fund. So it's a good thing. It catches you before you violate that and reminds you, oh yeah, I need to put in that receipt. It might not be that easy of a solution. Maybe you really don't have enough funds to pay that check. But this alerts you to that problem and basically forces you got to resolve that before you make the payment. So it's a good thing. But so it stops you. Now notice the buttons at the bottom. It says skip item or cancel all. Well, why would you want to, what does that mean, skip? Well, maybe you had 5 payments that you're going to make, and one of them was like a scenario like I talked about. It stops you on the first one. That's the first one that's going to post to cash. Well, maybe you want to post the other checks and then move on and figuring out what you're going to do about this one check. So you could skip this item move on to the other 4 checks, and all of those may post perfectly fine. So that's what that button is about. But I'm going to cancel this, and we'll say Brutus was really persistent. He said, hey, I remember class, and remember that the instructor said something about this general maintenance section. Under the entity setup, I can go to System and change the setting to Warn User with option Override. We'll get back to the book about this, but let me demonstrate what happens when you select Warn User with option Override. Now I'm going to save that setting. So we'll go back to our payment, and Brutus says, yep, I'm going to pay it. So he goes and post and print it. Make sure his reservations are ready for the flight to Hawaii, and he clicks OK. And ouch, it gives him a warning message, but this time it's a yellow light. And so it's a caution, and it says if the override button appears below, the item may post anyways. So when that option is selected, it'll list all the violations, the same violations we had before. If it gives you an option to do it anyways or to cancel. So, and it gives you optionally, you can put in a reason for your override. Now, Brutus' reason is not that good, okay? He says, I want more money. Not a good reason. I don't think his auditors will like that. I want money. So, more, I'll make it specific. I want more money. So that's not a good reason, but the reason you have that is if you have a good reason for doing this, you can put an explanation that will show up on a compliance report so that your auditors can see that before they even talk to you about it, because they're going to see this for sure. So I'm going to click on Override, and notice what happens when that posts. It's going to affect my estimated primary year. It goes 207 to, it's printing the check now, notice. So yeah, I got that check for $1 million. And I got a negative checking balance, negative fund balance. Not a pretty situation here at Buckeye Township. The auditors will see that. Well, let's say Brutus comes to his senses. What am I doing? It's too much partying last night. I got to reverse this. So he goes to accounting, utilities, payment utility. So I'm not going to cash that check. I'm going to avoid it. So he voids the check. We'll just put the same date. All right, that's good. The check's voided, and now we're back to our normal $270,000 checking balance. Everything's good. It's back to normal. But be aware that under General Reports and Statements, Compliance Report is even though he voided that check and reversed it, there's a record of this violation, and we can see that, and, it shows all the relevant information, the posting, transaction date, the user, if you have multiple users, what your compliance setting is, a description of the violation, the reason that I put in for that. If I record, now let's say it's this for a more innocent thing than this, and I have several, not just these violations, but several checks, it's going to record that as a separate line instance. So maybe it was 3 different checks that affected this, and so it would have 3 lines for every check if that's what affected. So it's going to record everything on this report. So you're not going to be able to sneak that by. But why, you may ask, why in the world would we have this in the first place? And that would be a good question. So let's go back to General Maintenance, Entity Setup. And again, this is Warn User with option Override. I'm going to set it back. If we look back in our book, page 111 says Warn User with option Override, get you the description, allow you to do it anyways. In bold, we've got give this setting careful consideration. I would say, in my opinion, very careful consideration. Choosing this option will allow you to enter the transactions that violate some legal restrictions. You should be aware that all statutory violations will be kept track of and reported on your audit compliance report. You and your auditors will see this if you do it. So why would we allow number 2, this number 2 option here? Well, from what I'm explained, the simple reason is that the auditors and local government services, the main auditors and local government services told us that we need to incorporate this into the UAN software, so we did so as a UAN. The reasoning, I think, behind it, this was when the software was first being designed and written. I wasn't part of that meetings, but this is what I'm told. They were told we want to include this, and the idea is that we have some people who are at current UAN customers who are, even with our software where we don't offer our software doesn't offer this option, they're still violating higher revised code. They're just doing it off the books, outside of the UAN software, and then they just own up. When they get caught, they own up to it, or they have to own up to it. If it's something crazy like this Brutus example, obviously no one's going to own up to it. They're going to skip town. But for less crazy things like that, you may say, okay, we might have some fiscal officers who just choose to do that. And at least with this, if they choose this option, or if you choose this option, our auditors will have a detailed record of the violation, and it'll stand out. And the fiscal officer has an opportunity to make a case and do it, under that reason field. That's the idea, as I'm told, was behind it. However, they don't want this to be used excessively or to be used, period, if it's not necessary. The idea is to keep it right there. Maybe an example of this might be you're not going through your audit, but you're consulting with one of your regional auditors, and you say, hey, I'm in this sticky situation. If I can just, break the rule here in this one case, I can get through the week, and then I'll never have to do it again, blah, blah, blah. Maybe they would say to you, the auditor tells you, hey, change the setting just for that, just one situation. Yes, when you get your auditor, you're going to get dinged on your audit for this. But, I'm directing you to change it here, a temporary situation. You go ahead and post that payment, and you'll get a receipt in a couple weeks here, and then that'll correct the problem that occurred, or whatever the case may be, whatever violation is. And then, but just do it for that 1 week or that one time, and then put an explanation, cite, this auditor said I could do this and I would get, hit on my audit, but it was okay. And then change it back to stop user when not in compliance. That's sort of the spirit of why this is in there. For very, very rare circumstances is the idea. But it is available, obviously at your discretion you can do that. So, last time I'll say it, recommend leaving it right there. If not, you need to be able to justify with your auditors that you would violate that. Okay, the third setting you can see is grayed out. Turn off compliance controls. And notice it says in gray here, only UAN can turn off these controls. So that's why it's read-only. A UAN tech support person would have to do this, have to remote any computer and do this. And the reason they might do this is if you're under fiscal emergency and local government services says we're monitoring this township or village, and we would just like you for a set period of time, let's say 3 months, just turn off all the compliance controls. If we do that, it won't even give you a warning message that you're violating compliance controls. It'll record it in the background, but again, fiscal emergency, LGS may permit that. That has to be, that you can't call us and say, hey, please turn off all compliance controls. A representative from local government services or a regional auditor has to call UAN directly and the support supervisor and authorize that, and then we will do it for a very set period of time, whatever they tell us. Okay, so that's it for compliance violations. I'll go ahead. Actually, I do want to save this to stop user. I'll close that. And now if you turn to page 113, we've got something that we're going to spend very little time on, and that is reserve balance accounts and designation. Well, in our experience so far, very few of the UN customers use this, so we don't go into a very detailed explanation on this. Just kind of show you where it is, and I'll give you kind of a general explanation of why you might use this. Well, the reserve balance account, you might use this for certain instances where you want to designate money that for long-term planning. So remember, when you set your appropriation budget, that's on a yearly basis, fiscal year. And so there might be some instances where you need to, your entity, for instance, let's say you're a village or township and you've got a volunteer fire department, and you've got some fire equipment that you purchase that wears out, and you need to replenish that every so often, let's say every 5 or 6 years. The cost is usually going to be, so next time it's going to be about $50,000. We'll make it simple. So you can't really afford to come up with $50,000 any particular year, but in the fund that you need to use, but you can't afford to save up $10,000 for 5 years, and at the end of the 5 years, spend that money. Well, if you didn't have the reserve balance account, what you would have to do is not appropriate that money. In other words, if you remember our resources available for appropriation, our budgetary reports, and our accounting reports and statement budgetary. Remember, we had our resources available appropriation and then our appropriated amount. So I look at an example of this. You think of your amended certificate and your appropriation ordinance. Well, if you would have to leave some of this here, we've got quite a bit. Let's say here in this example, we have estimated resources for the year of $101,000, but in Road and Bridge we only appropriated $57,000. So you would, in our example, if you had a fund, let's say that, and you had wanted to spend save $10,000 a year, well, in year number 1, you would have to not appropriate or have a variance of at least $10,000, in which, let's say it's you collect $100,000 that year. So the most you could appropriate in year number 1 is $90,000. That way you don't spend that extra $10,000 and you can save it up over the years. Well, the problem is when you get to year 4 or 5, let's say you get to year 5, you've got to not appropriate $40,000 and not appropriate $50,000 in that year. And so the taxpayers may look at you and say, why in the world are you not, or why are you collecting all these taxes and you don't have any need for that money? So this kind of solves that problem for that long-term expenses and savings, because they can look at if it qualifies under these revised codes. If you're allowed to do this, then they can look at the reserve balance account and say, okay, in year number 4, even though they didn't appropriate that money, it's reserved for these purposes. So the money's accounted for, it's going to be used, and it gives them more of an explanation for your citizens as to why you've got that money, but you have maybe a lot more money than they would expect, but it's for like a one-time or periodic expense over multiple years. So it kind of acts like a secondary checking account in the sense that, and I'll go back to, see, this is under, actually this is not under general maintenance anymore. This is under accounting, maintenance. You set up the reserve balance accounts here in the maintenance section, and you select add, and you pick the Ohio Revised Code that this applies to. So you can look up, like I said, I'm not going to include all the details here. You can look up the Ohio Revised Code on the Auditor State's website. Maybe it's under the Ohio Supplemental. You can look up there, or just on the website, the actual code. And I'll skip through this and just show you that it's different depending on which law applies. So you're going to have to determine if the use of why you want to use this, if it qualifies under this law. And again, you can look up those codes and determine if you can use this for your the purpose that you want it for. And the screen will be a little bit different, the options a little different depending on the revised code. But you set up the accounts here, and no money set aside. That's just the maintenance section. To set aside that, my example, $10,000 a year, year one you would go to reserve balance designation. Again, I'll skip this. I don't have any active accounts. I'd pick my reserve balance account, could have multiple, and then you'd transfer the money into that reserve balance account, and it would, if you tried to, let's say if I had $50,000 and I tried to spend $10,000 reserved, it would prevent me from spending that more than $40,000. Okay, so again, another compliance control based on your settings in UEN. So if you have any questions about that, you can call UEN support on how to use it. As far as the law, look that up on the Auditor State's website, those laws related to the reserve balance. I went to the wrong place. I meant to click reserve balance accounts. And you can also, you may, if you still have questions, call your regional audit or local government services. Okay, so really that's it for the book. Our next lesson is going to be on the conversion manual for those of you who are converting from a non-UAN system to UAN. I thought I'd show you one last thing before I finish up the book, and that's just on how to elaborate a little bit on the filters. This is actually when you go to the Welcome to UEN video, but since I think I didn't cover it at all in class, if you look at, for instance, receipt utility, you've got your various filtering options. You can filter by outstanding, voided, reprintable types. You've got many options for filtering and searching depending on the screen. For instance, I can filter by the type of receipt, and these correspond to the column headings. So here I've got different types: memo, or all. And then in the right-hand corner, you usually have search options. You can kind of narrow down your search by selecting different things, like here's the transaction number, so I can search by the transaction number. Now, this is easy to see on our list. It's very short, but if the list goes on many pages of your receipts at the end of the year, well, it might be hard to find certain receipts for those larger entities. So you can search those options. So for instance, if I want to search for, I'll reset the screen here. If I want to search for county auditor, I just type in county, and I don't even have to complete the name. I can click on the search button, and it filters everything that has county auditor. I'll look at every field in the receipts. If I click on this button, it resets the screen. Be aware that these are dependent. These filters are dependent on each other, and the search options are dependent on each other. So for instance, here we have interest receipts. If I search for, so if I filter by interest receipts, and then I look for the county auditor, it doesn't show up. There's no receipts that are interest receipts that have the word county in any of the fields. And that's because these two are kind of work in conjunction. But if I filter by all, I can see that county auditor shows up. Okay, I just thought I'd add that since I don't believe I covered that anywhere else. So thank you for attending this class, and we will, if you do not have, if you are not converting to UAN, not in the middle of the conversion process, then this is the end of the new client, newly elected accounting course. And if you are converting, we have 1 or 2 more lessons on specifically on the different conversion types.